In a super physiological context, if we're talking about bodybuilding, then yeah, I agree that pre-bed, one of the dosages pre-bed makes sense. The reason being there's a negative feedback loop with GH and IGF-1. So I'm going to post a study here called Negative Feedback Regulation of Pulsatile Growth Hormone Secretion by Insulin-like Growth Factor 1 Involvement of Hypothalamic Somatostatin. So in this study, IGF-1 was constantly infused and the effect on endogenous GH secretion was assessed. Overall, GH concentrations were suppressed during the IGF-1 infusion by 85%, mainly by attenuating spontaneous GH pulse amplitude, 77% suppression. The apparent GH pulse frequency was attenuated from 7.8 to 4.7 pulses per 24 hours. So there's a negative feedback loop on the growth hormone IGF-1 axis. So it's similar to how, the HPTA works when you have, elevated testosterone and estrogen levels, or your body senses that you have a sufficient amount, it's going to prevent you from making more. And this is, sort of how it regulates itself. So IGF-1 is the primary feedback in this loop for the GH IGF-1 axis, and it acts in a similar mechanism. So the same thing happens when you administer exogenous GH. When you administer GH, your IGF-1 levels increase, obviously. And then the result of that is your body has this feedback loop in place that recognizes IGF-1 is elevated, therefore it doesn't need to produce as much GH. So when your body recognizes that IGF-1 is elevated, it's going to start suppressing GH pulse amplitude in a dose-dependent manner. So if you're using super physiological amounts of GH for bodybuilding purposes, you can assume that your natural secretion is greatly inhibited during sleep, as the negative feedback loop will prevent your body from secreting GH in your sleep like it normally would. So this is where it actually makes sense to use, part of your daily dose pre-bed, because that secretion, that pulse you would get during sleep, you're no longer getting. So, replacing it in that time frame where, recovery is the most critical, it obviously makes sense. Like, what are the most logical times to take your GH if you're inhibiting the feedback loop? It would be when you're sleeping, pre-workout probably, and then maybe like post-workout. Those are like the only times that would make sense to me in terms of if you want to maximize lipolysis, fasted before cardio or training, if you train fasted, post-workout as well for IGF-1, muscle growth, and before going to sleep in case your sleep pulse is inhibited because of the amount you're using. So it's all dose dependent, individual dependent, but it's like as far as when you use it, the dose you take, it does matter.